Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Excel webinar 5 of the best Excel tips for students. We are just about to get started, so I'm going to run through a few quick opening items to welcome you on board and to introduce the webinar platform to you, let you know how you can get involved in the webinar today. And then after that, we are going to get stuck in. So to start with, I just want to talk a little bit about where this presentation is coming from today. So this presentation is brought to you by ICAEW's Excel community. So as an ICAEW student, you can become a member of the faculties online for free, and that does include access to the Excel community training. And that training includes a suite of online training modules which cover all sorts of Excel and related knowledge, including both basic and advanced Microsoft Excel, as well as Power BI and some data analytics work, as well as some specific accountant-based tips. As well as those, the Excel community also offers you a range of Excel webinars presented by myself and many other Excel experts, as well as regular updates and blogs. So if you are interested in finding out more about that, if you go to ICAEW.com/joinexcel, and there is actually information there also about how to join as a student, and we will also send around that link for joining the Excel community after the fact. Allow me to introduce myself briefly. My name is David Lapitilli. I am a technical manager in the tech faculty here at ICAEW, and one of my roles here is looking after the Excel community and all of its various outputs as the editor-in-chief. I'm also a former full-time Excel trainer for one of the firms and have been involved in Excel training and support for accountants for many years. Over the course of this presentation, I'm going to give you a few bits of tips and tricks of what I think are some of the most fundamental and important things to know about Excel and how to use it. And I'm also going to talk to you about some of the kind of really useful little tricks that I think are specifically for accountants, as well as just sort of general tips. Just to head off a couple of early questions. If you don't manage to catch everything that I do during this live presentation, don't worry. The webinar will be recorded and you will be able to view the recording after the fact. And secondly, if you would like to get a copy of the workbook that I'm going to be presenting from today, we will also circulate that along with the recording. So if you'd like to follow through with my examples in more detail, or if you'd like to have an experiment with the workbook that I'm using today yourself, then don't worry, you will be able to do that. Also just want to note, as well as my 5 tips, I'm also going to be taking questions from you in the audience. So if at any point during the session you have any questions that you'd like me to answer, or if you have any kind of tech support questions that you would need assistance with, then if you use the question Q&A button in the toolbar, you will be able to submit your question. You can also upvote other questions. So if you are having a look through and you see that someone else has asked a question that you would like to see answered, then you can upvote that and we will take the questions in order of how popular they are. Of course, also means if you think you've got a question, do give a quick check first to see if someone else has asked it already, just so that we can, and then just upvote theirs instead of submitting a duplicate. And as I said, you can also use that to send through your technical questions. So if you're experiencing a loss of sound, or if you have any other kind of technical issues of that sort, send them in and we'll do our best to help you. So I'm now going to switch over to Excel. Now, as I mentioned, this is the workbook that you will be able to access when we send out the recording shortly after this live session. I've picked 5 things which I think are important to share and think about in Excel. And we're going to start with a kind of overview and introduction to formulas. Now, I'm going to assume that probably most people watching this have already done formulas in Excel to some extent, but I think it's really helpful to try to break it down to the basics so that you can understand each part of what a formula is doing, and then that can help with troubleshooting when you're trying to write newer formulas. So the example that I've used to start with is a sum formula where I have a column of 5 numbers, and then I have a function in this cell which is adding them up. So breaking down the different elements so that we understand what each one is doing. Formulas always start with an equal sign. That's how Excel tells which things are formulas and which things are just regular text. We then include the name of the specific function that we want to use, and there are about 800 functions in Excel that do all sorts of different kinds of operations on data. Sum is by far the most commonly used one, of course. Immediately after the name of a function will be an open parenthesis, and that shows where the inputs to that particular function begin. And then, of course, if we check at the end, we'll see that there is a closed parenthesis showing the end of the function. So all functions follow that format, equals the name of the function, an open bracket and a closed bracket. What goes in between those brackets will differ depending on the function in question. And in particular, some functions are very flexible. So the sum function, for example, just takes numbers and then adds up those numbers. You can have lots of them and you can mix up the order, but many functions have a specific order where each input has a specific role or indicates a specific thing. But the IntelliSense is the name of this little pop-up thing here that shows you what each input is supposed to contain. And when we get on to talking about lookups in a minute, you'll see how that will help us to identify what each input is for. You can also click on the name of the function here or on this FX button up here to get open a help. Or if you want to actually get from the FX button, you get a full wizard that talks you through what each part of the formula is doing. But I think that actually trying to do it directly in Excel is usually the quickest, most effective way. The other piece of formula syntax that we need to talk about is the differences between different pieces of punctuation. So if we have this cell here, so this is the same function we had above, C11 colon C15 is the way that we write a range. So identifying a block of cells by listing the first cell and then a colon and then the last one. That shortcut's listing a whole range, and that's different to something like this, where we have a comma, and a comma separates multiple separate inputs. So here we have one input, which is a range, C11 to C13, and one input, which is just a direct cell reference, C15. As well as cell references, formulas can contain hard-coded values. So for example, I could just type a 10 in here, but this is not considered good practice because it means that the input to the formula is invisible. It makes it more difficult to review and easier to get wrong. So with very few exceptions, hard-coding inputs into formulas is not really what we want to be doing. And we want to really try and make sure that we're taking the inputs of the formula from cells in the sheet. These prompts, as I mentioned, IntelliSense are very helpful. I've got a few examples of a few different functions here that you might use on different circumstances and how IntelliSense will help you identify what each of the inputs is for. So for example, if you need to round the number, then the function that you would call is called equals round. And the round function has two inputs. It has the number and then the number of digits. So this is one of those rare cases where I think actually, for example, if you're rounding a currency amount, that's going to be to 2 digits and that's never going to change. So you're kind of safe putting your digit accuracy in the formula. But of course, that could also be another cell and that rounds that number to the nearest 2 decimal places. If you want something that is going to highlight a value if it's an error, then you can use the if error function. And again, you see that the first input is called the value. So that's the cell value that it's going to take. And then the second input is the value if that is an error. And here we've put the word error, and putting it inside quote marks like this tells Excel that we want the word error. What that means is that if this cell contains a normal value, then the formula will just repeat that value. If it, however, contains some kind of an error message, so for example, 1 divided by 0 gives a div0 error, then now our calculation returns our chosen error message. Likewise, if you have a conditional calculation, you want to know is the amount in this cell material or not, then the if function can do that. And here's a look again at breaking down that syntax. So we've got 3 inputs here. We have a logical test, the value if that test is true, and the value if that test is false. You can see also I can click on those different elements to highlight which part of the formula forms that input. So the first part we have here is D35 greater than 35,000. Really, I shouldn't be typing the 35,000 into the cell. That should be stored somewhere else. But that's checking whether that amount exceeds that threshold or not. And then we've used a greater than sign here as a greater than test. You can also do less than using a less than sign. If that is true, so if this value is greater than 35,000, then the formula will return the value if true, which is the word material. And if that is not true, so the value is 34,999 or less, then we are going to return the value if false, which is not material. And so we can use this to easily label amounts as material or not material based on their value. But also it's an example of how we can break down how this formula works by examining the IntelliSense tooltip here and sort of considering how that comes together. So let's have a look at some of the other most useful Excel elements. So the second point I'm going to talk about is a class of functions specifically known as lookup functions. Now, lookup functions are used for a whole variety of tasks, and they are very, very helpful. And I'm going to have a look at how these come together. Now, first of all, let's talk about what lookup functions are for. So lookup functions are for finding a value that matches a label. So here, for example, I've got a list of accounts in no particular order and the balance that they had during 2019, of course, also in no particular order. So that's my prior year balances. And then what I've now got is my 2020 list of accounts. So over here, I have another list of accounts, again, in no particular order, almost, but not quite the same as the last one. I have my 2020 balances, but I want to create a comparison to the 2019 balances. Now for that, I'm going to need for each line to pull the appropriate 2019 balance through. And in order to do that, I need to use a lookup function. I'm going to look at 3 different ways of doing this, starting with VLOOKUP. The first thing to note is that all of these functions require that our labels are identical. So you need to make sure that you have an exact matching label from one year to the next. You don't have to have a completely identical list, but matches will only be found when they are the same and also when they're unique. So if you have multiple trade debtors lines, then this is not going to work. We're going to look at something that would solve that problem a little bit later. The other thing to note is that here we've used VLOOKUP to pull out a numeric value, but actually this works just as well with text. So if we had some kind of comment, for example, on each of these balances, we could also use VLOOKUP to pull the comment from that account from the previous year. So let's have a look at our function. So here's the function from the cell H5. So the VLOOKUP, so the V stands for vertical. VLOOKUP works when we are doing a vertical lookup. That is to say that the things we're looking up are arranged vertically. And it then has 4 inputs. I'm going to briefly talk about this one because I don't actually like VLOOKUP very much. I don't think it's the best function for doing this, but it is commonly used, so it's good to understand how it works. So it has 4 inputs. So the first one is called the lookup value. So this is the label, the particular description that we are interested in pulling. In this case, we've taken cell F5, and that means that we're going to be looking for the trade debtors amount. Our second input, the table array, tells Excel where we are going to search for this particular value. We've chosen B5 to C14, which you can see highlighted in orange here. That is the 2019 table. A couple things to note here. First of all, VLOOKUP only works if the labels are in the first column of that table. So the list of labels that we're going to search has to be the first column. This is one of the reasons, and there are many, why I don't like VLOOKUP very much. The second thing to note is you'll notice that this isn't written just B5 colon C14. Instead, it's $B $5 colon $C $14. What's going on with these dollars? Well, this is another bit of Excel language that is important to understand, and this is how fixed references work. So if you if I just take a quick digression, if I have some numbers and I write a formula that does something to one of those numbers, let's say, for example, multiplies it by 5, when I copy and paste this formula into other cells, the formula doesn't get replicated exactly, instead it's changed as it goes. Because this cell looked at D5, this one looks at D6, this one looks at D7. In other words, when I copy the formula downward, all of the cell references in the formula are also moved downward. And that's fine, that's normal, that's what you want to happen most of the time. It means you only have to write one formula for a whole column. But in this case, we do have to be a little bit more careful. While we do want this lookup value, F5, that does need to change as we copy the formula to each row. We want to take each account name in turn. This part of the formula must not change, because if we allowed this to move down as we copied the formula, that box would be moving down like this and our formula would break. So to avoid that happening, we write the formula reference with those dollar signs, and that's how we say to Excel, always B, always 5, to always C, always 14. So we are locking in that reference to the table array and explaining that when we copy and paste this formula, change this part, do not change this part. Okay, so we know what the value we're looking for is, we know where to look for it. The third input is the column index number, tells Excel which part of the data to return. So this is literally just a number that says which column do you want back. So if you put column 1, it will return the first column. If you put A2, it'll return the second column. And in a bigger table, you might need to put in 3, 4, 5, 6. Whatever number is needed to tell Excel which is the column that you care about. So now we have the thing to look for, the place to look for it, and what to return. And that might seem like that's all you need, but unfortunately there is one final input called the range lookup, which is a terrible name. But if I delete that for a second, you'll see it's actually an option. So the IntelliSense here drops down with 2 different options. The true option, which is described as an approximate match, and the false option described as an exact match. And we want to type in false here, or 0 also works, to tell Excel, I want only to find an exact match. If the items don't match exactly, don't do anything. The other one you might think might be a good idea if you've got slightly different labels, but it's very naive, it's not very good, it won't work. So then we can copy and paste that down. We get our values against each label. You'll notice we have this not applicable error on one line. That has happened because the savings account exists in the 2020 situation, but not in 2019. So we could amend our formula using the if error that we looked at earlier to return a 0 here, but actually I'm kind of comfortable with a not applicable error because it just tells us, yeah, there isn't a savings account in the previous year. That is something that I should know. So that's a look at how you do that with VLOOKUP. I'm going to move on to my preferred solution in most cases, which is index match, which accomplishes the same goal, but in a much more flexible and reliable way. So same exact situation, we have got our accounts, we've got our 2020 balances, we need to identify the appropriate 2019 balances, and we don't want to have to sit here and manually find the labels for every one of these. We might have hundreds and hundreds of accounts to go through. We don't want to do that one at a time. So this uses a combination of 2 different functions, one called index and one called match. I'll briefly talk about them individually. I'll just make a quick example over here. Okay. So the first one, index. Index is a very, very basic, simple function. All it does is take, or at least all it does in the way of the kind of context where we're using it, is it takes a single row or column, and then you specify a row number, let's say 5, and it will say, okay, take that, take the number 5. The 5th item in that list is 65,000. It's just going to position number 5. It's just a very simple kind of mail address where it will just say, here's the street, here's the house number, what is in that position? And you change the number and you will get a different results. And that's all index does. You can actually use it for other stuff, you can, but that is the basic use of it. Okay, well, that's not very helpful. That's not a very useful function on its own. What about match? Well, match is kind of like, this is the one that's actually doing the looking up in our situation, but it again is more simplistic. If you tell it to look up, let's say on F5 in a particular array, a single column or a single row like this, and you specify, again, your match type. So this is similar to the true false thing we had last time. We want 0. That's an exact match. All it will do is look for this item in that list and tell you where it is. So you can say, there's that one. And if I copy that down, I didn't fix my list, did I? Let's fix that. Okay, so then you can see still didn't manage to get that quite right. There we go, $5 to B14. And now I can copy this down. There we go. That's on line 1, that's on line 3, that one's on line 4, that one's on line 5, that one doesn't exist. So this just gives you a position, But it's now that you know the address of that particular item, you can use that result in your index to go steer it to the right output. So what does that look like in practice? Well, this is why it's called index match, because when you read it, it says index match, but it's important to understand that actually it's calculated like a mathematical equation from the inside outward. So what's happening here is we have our match function that is looking at trade debtors, and it's looking for that in the purple region here. It's going to identify that trade debtors appears on row number 1. That number 1 is then going to be fed into our index function, which is going to look through the 2019 balances, and it's going to find number 1, which is of course the trade debtors balance. So this performs the same task as VLOOKUP, but it's a much more efficient solution. Why is it that I say it's more efficient? Well, there's a few different reasons. One of those reasons is that in the VLOOKUP case, you have to do this column counting business, which for a large table is very impractical. VLOOKUP also only works if the labels are on the first column, whereas index match doesn't care. And actually I think possibly the most important reason is if somebody later on comes along and decides they need to add a column into my spreadsheet, they add a column here, then what's going to happen is that all of my VLOOKUPs are going to break because the output is now should be outputting column 3, but it's outputting the blank column 2. So that's going to break my whole formula. Whereas if I insert a column in this one, nothing changes, everything works perfectly because the index and the match look directly at the 2 columns we care about. So that's much more reliable. Third one to mention very quickly, this is only available in Excel for Office 365 and the shortly upcoming Excel 2022. So this is a very new function, so you may not have it depending on what version of Excel you have. If you have access to it, it is the best one. It can do lots of clever things. So the lookup value is the same as before, although actually you can see here we can specify a whole bunch of lookup values. The lookup array is just that single column where you're going to try and find matches. The return array is then where you're going to find results. You don't need to specify only find exact matches. That's the default for XLOOKUPs. That's one of the advantages it has. The other thing is you can actually specify if you want and if not found. So if you don't find a matching item, we can say directly in the formula, well, what do you want to do? And you can say 0. And this one formula in H5 then automatically spills down to all the rest. So there is only one formula in this column. And you'll see if I delete that one formula, the whole lot goes. That one formula spills out to do the same job for every single value. So with just one formula, I can do the whole lot. So it's a better function, but it is only available in some places. So let's move on to talk about our third top. I'm just going to take a quick drink and then we'll move on. So we've looked at formulas, we've looked at lookups. Now I want to talk about a powerful way of analyzing data that doesn't require any formulas at all, and that is a pivot table. So what have I got here? I have got a accounting nominal ledger. I have got the account code, name, transaction date, and a debit or credit transaction amount for each of these items. And I have 37,000 transactions, which covers the whole year of this transactions for this particular entity. And I want to analyze this. Now, the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add a net column to my table, which is just going to be the debit minus the credit. Now, I can see what's going on here. Why am I getting a value error, you might ask? Well, it's because this cell that I think is blank is actually containing some sort of null text value. So I can, it's thinking that this is text, and I'm trying to do things with subtracting text. So what I'm going to try doing is value this minus value that. No, it still doesn't want to work. Somebody's just knocking at the door. I'm just going to check with them. Oh, no. Somebody was trying to come into the meeting room, but has decided not to. So that's good. We don't want people interrupting us while things are happening. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this for a second. And I'm going to come to my data filter. I am going to filter out my data and only look at the blanks. So if you've not used filter before, data filter. And what this does is it lets you filter so only certain rows are shown. So I'm doing a little bit of pre-cleaning on my data here. All of these items here which are showing as blank, I'm just going to highlight and press delete, and that will clear them out so that they are properly blank. And I will do the same with my credit values. Delete it. You shouldn't worry about much about these steps. This is just because my particular data has some had that issue. There we go. Now I can do equals debit minus credit, and I get my amount. I'll copy that down the column, and now I have a net debit or credit amount for each of these columns, and that's going to make my life a lot easier when I come to analyze my data. Incidentally, I did a couple of quick shortcutty things there. One of them is if I've got a formula in a cell like this, and it's next to a nice big table, and I want to copy and paste that down the whole column, all I have to do is go to that bottom right-hand corner. Now you can click and drag to copy it a little bit. This is 37,000 rows tall. I don't want to click and drag for that long, so I'm going to just double click, and then that will immediately copy that formula down the whole piece. And that's going to make my life much easier. So I want to analyze this data, and the way that I'm going to do that is going to be to go to the Insert menu. Just going to move my Zoom menu out of the way. So I'm going to go to Insert Pivot Table, and this is going to create the pivot table for me. Now, what is a pivot table? We can just see here, by the way, it's automatically detected the data goes A1 to F3745 and suggested placing the pivot table on a new worksheet. I'm totally cool with both of those things, so I'm going to just press OK. So that's going to create a new worksheet for me. Let me zoom in a little bit. And so what's a pivot table? A pivot table is a summary. It's a way of taking a big table with lots of stuff in it and squishing it into a smaller, more manageable size. So you'll see that I've got this sort of reminder over here telling me to build my pivot table. And then on the right, I have the menu where I'm actually going to be able to design my pivot table. So all I need to do, you see the things, the elements I have available: account code, account name, date, debit, credit, and my net column. Those are the column names from my original data. The original data is still here, by the way, hasn't gone anywhere. And what I'm going to be able to do is just drag these labels into the different boxes at the bottom here to design the summary I want. So let's start with the account names. I've got lots of different account names here. They're repeated, they're in all sorts of higgledy-piggledy order. I'm going to take account name, click and drag it to the rows box, and that will then make the rows of my report be the account names. They are alphabetized, all the duplicates are removed. So where I had 37,000 rows in the original, I've got about 120 or so in this new version. So that's much, much easier to deal with. I've just got a unique list of all of those labels. Okay, good, that's an excellent start. I don't just want some labels though, I also want some values. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my net column and I'm going to drag that to my values column, box rather, drop that in there, and automatically Excel will create a summarized version of that net according to this labeling. So you can see here what we have is the sum of net. In fact, I've just created the trial balance for this company. So this trial balance has got all of the items in it, and you can see that was created in just a few seconds just by kind of clicking and dragging things. Now, there's some more things I can do with pivot tables, but that's the basics. It's just to take the labels of the items you want, click and drag them into the places where you want them, and then Excel will take care of the rest. I will show you a few more tricks you can do with pivot tables and some extensions, but they're also a very safe thing to play with. There is one thing I should note, however: if I make a change to my original data, that change will not show up in the pivot table until I refresh the pivot table. So I would need to do that from the data ribbon, and then there's a refresh button there. Or you might see I've also got this pivot table analyze ribbon, and that has a refresh button. Or you can right click on the pivot and hit refresh, but none of the formulas, the detail will not update to reflect the latest numbers until you do that. So that is an important aspect and thing to remember when dealing with pivot tables. click on that, and I'm going to open up my value field settings, so I can change the settings a little bit. Here we go. And I am going to change the number format. Just getting a notification that my internet has a little hiccup there, so I'm going to give it a second so that it can catch up. Okay, good. So I'm going to choose to format these numbers as a currency, 2 decimal places, £. I'll use a minus sign and red font for negative numbers so that they're easy to see. That sounds good. You can see I could also change here how those numbers are being summarized. I currently have a sum for each label, but I could choose to count for each label, or I could average or maximum or minimum. You know, there's a few different options there, but summing sounds good here. So I'm going to hit OK. Right, that's a bit nicer now. I have much more readable numbers. If I wanted to add a secondary axis to my pivot table, I could do that. So I could take something like the date, for example, and I could add that to, let's say, the columns. Now, depending on your Excel version, mine automatically, when you add a date as a column label, automatically groups it into months rather than showing every individual date as a column. But you can choose how the grouping works by right-click, and then you've got group and ungroup. So if I choose group, it's currently grouped by day and month. So I'm actually going to, let's say, unselect those, and I'll select quarters and press OK. And there we go. Now my pivot has a column for each of quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a grand total at the end. So I can easily produce a report with a second label like that. And of course, there wouldn't have to be a date. Any kind of label does that. And of course, I can just drag that back out to get rid of it. So these are really easy to produce, quick ways of making summarized data. One last thing I'll mention is, let's say that I have taken my nominal ledger, I have generated my trial balance, I'm auditing it, I'm having a look, and I think, okay, audit and accountancy fees, 18,479.24. That looks interesting. What's going on there? If you want to find out more about that number, if you double click on that value, as soon as you double click, Excel will create another new tab for you. So you can see here, this is on sheet 2. That has all of the 30 items that make up that total listed automatically, and I can then inspect that to my heart's content. So that gives me an opportunity to actually go and drill in a bit more detail. And I'm going to delete that now because I'm done with it. So you can just double click values if there's anything that you want to see in more detail. So pivot tables are a very powerful way of analyzing data very easily. I can see a few questions have been coming in, by the way. So that is excellent. There's lots and lots of questions that we can get to, hopefully. So do continue sending in. We've got a good start, so plenty of time to talk about that. I'm going to quickly talk about our remaining 2 tips, which are shorter tips, and then we're going to get to your questions. So tip number 4, and this is about randomization. And randomization is really important, specifically if you're thinking about audit, because it is really helpful for doing random sampling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this works. It's also useful in general accounting if you are doing any kind of modeling or forecasting and you need some dummy numbers, you need some random dummy data to help test your use case, then this is a really helpful tool for doing that. So there are 2 functions in particular that you can use for most Excel versions. The first one I'm going to talk about is rand between, and this generates a random number between 2 limits. So for example, you can say, I want a number between 1 and 10, and then you can have the function equals rand between, and you just specify the bottom number and the top number, and it will give you an integer within that range. So here I've got between 1 and 10. Okay, my random number is 9. The other thing to note is that every time Excel recalculates, which will happen when you type something in a cell or when you tell it to recalculate, the randomization is re-rolled and you get a new random value. And so that is all updated live. You can then use that. You can only generate whole numbers with rand between, but you can use it to generate random amounts using a little bit of trickery. So here is a random invoice amount generator. And what I've told it to do, I want a random invoice amount between 100 and £1,000. So that's my range. I want a random value between £100 and £1,000. And the way that I've done that is I've scaled up my integers by 100 each. So I've asked for a random integer between 10,000 and 100,000, and then I've divided the result by 100. So although rand between can only make integers, by doing this kind of scaling trick, I can make random invoice amounts anywhere in the region of £100 to £1,000 or whatever other band I want. The other function that's worth knowing about for randomization is the function that's just called rand. And this function just generates a random decimal number between 0 and 1. It's much easier than to write because it's just equals rand, open bracket, close bracket. No inputs are needed. And this is handy because you will not get duplicates with rand. So it's handy if you need to create a random sample. So let's say that I, for example, want to pick one of these 4 items at random so that I can sample, go and test it. The way that I'm going to do that is I've got my 4 items. I have rand function in this column. So each of these is a rand function. Those are all independent. They all generate a different random number. And then all I need to do is sort the data by this random number. So I can go data and sort, let's say A to Z, and then that will sort the numbers into order, which scrambles the randomized items on the left here into a random order. Now that these are shuffled, I can just pick the top one. So D, that will be my random item. I actually have another demonstration of that I can show you very quickly. This is using a bigger set of items. This is a deck of cards. And again, I could just type equals rand, open bracket, close bracket. That will generate, and then here I'm going to have a 5-item sample. I'm going to copy and paste my formula, so I now have a random number assigned to each value. I will use data and sort to randomize the items into a random order, and now the top 5 items can be my sample, even though, unfortunately, I did not get a very good poker hand in this case. So that is how you do randomized sampling and random generation of items. Once again, if you do have Office 365, then the rand array function does exist, and you can use that to generate lots of random numbers with a single formula. I'm not going to talk about it here, however. The last of my 5 tips that I want to talk about is more of a meta point. So I've shown you here some particularly useful different Excel items, but I want to talk to you about how to get better at using Excel more generally. And in particular, what the resources are that are available to help you do that. And it's also about not just getting better in terms of your skills, but also better in terms of producing an accurate result and talking about good practice. And I think the most important thing that we've done at ICAEW on that subject is the 20 principles for good spreadsheet practice. So this, I'm just going to quickly open here, is a free guide that we produced some years ago now, talking about the most important rules for good practice in spreadsheets. It's free to anybody that wants it. There are 20 simple rules to think about. And some of the things, in fact, that I've spoken about already appear on here. So, for example, never embed in a formula anything that might change or need to be changed. So I spoke about that earlier, that you shouldn't hide inputs inside formulas. They should have their own cells. Or you might look at things like separate and identify inputs, workings, and outputs. So try to have input cells in one place, output cells in another, and that will make your spreadsheet easier to understand and make it less likely that something is going to go wrong. Or you might see bigger rules like rigorously test the workbook. It's really important to do testing and to make sure that you've not just maybe built a workbook to calculate something or to put something together, but if you are going to rely on that calculation, that some testing goes into it. So if you want to have a look at that, then there's a link in the workbook which we'll send around after the live part. We also have several other publications that I'll briefly mention. So if you're interested in checking just how good your Excel skills are and where you are kind of lie on the spectrum of Excel use and what you might want to study if you want to move on to the next level, then I would suggest looking at the Spreadsheet Competency Framework. If you are somebody who works in the area of financial modeling, we have a guide called the Financial Modeling Code. And we've just actually in the last few weeks released our newest report called How to Review a Spreadsheet, which is somewhat self-explanatory. This is what that's for. So if you're interested in that, that's also free and you can have a look at all of that. And this is the link, which again we'll send out to everybody with the recording. We'll send out this file with this link, which tells you all about how to sign up as a student to find out more about all of the work that we do in Excel. So I'm going to take another quick drink, and then we're going to move on to taking some of your questions. So once again, chance for you to type in your questions and to upvote the ones you're most interested in, and then we will we'll take those in just a moment. All right, let's have a look at some questions. So I am going to take this one first of all. So this is from, it scrolled away just as I was trying to read it. An anonymous attendee asks, will you be going into detail what will be examined in the new syllabus for BSc, FM and SPM? So obviously at this point we can see that no, I'm not going to talk about that in much detail. There is a specific web page on the ICAEW website that talks about the specific functions that are mentioned for those examinations, and that has a sort of walkthrough of all of those. We do also have, as part of our webinar and blog archive, some deep dives into each of those. I'm here, however, I've been talking about more general Excel skills that are, relevant to your whole career. And I think that, knowing those things for the specific examinations is very helpful. But I think that, that it's better to sort of try and look at the long view of the most important skills, not just for those exams, but for the rest as well. And actually, of course, there is quite a lot of overlap between the things that are covered in the specific list of things for those examinations and what I've spoken about today. Okay, let's take the next question. Is there anything to generate a random number once only, or do you have to copy and paste special values? Yeah, you are exactly correct. That is what you have to do. So all of these, so functions of any kind always update whenever you change anything in Excel. These randomization functions are what are called volatile functions, which means they always recalculate whenever anything happens. So if after using one of these to generate a random number, you want to have some evidence of that random number, you can't leave it as a formula. You have to replace it with a value. And one way to do that is to copy and then paste special, Control-Alt-V, or paste special values, and then that will replace the formula with the value of the formula. So here is my random number, and that is now frozen. So that you're quite correct. That is what you have to do if you want to do that. Next question. Let me mark that as answering live. A list of keyboard shortcuts for Excel. I'm not going to put out a comprehensive list. There are some comprehensive lists out there of every single keyboard shortcut. I think those aren't very helpful because there's all sorts of keyboard shortcuts that are really niche. I will talk about a few of my favorites, and then once again, I can include in the resources that we'll send after the recording links to a couple of blogs that I've done talking about Excel shortcuts in general. The most useful stuff is the navigation one. So here I'm just using my arrow keys to move around the workbook, and that takes a while. If I hold Control when I'm doing that, then I move in jumps, and those jumps go between filled cells. So if I have a big filled range like this, I can use hold Control and use arrow keys to move around. If I hold Shift while I'm moving around with the arrow keys, I can select an area. And that also means if I hold Control, Shift, and then press arrow keys, I can select, for example, that whole range very quickly. That's, I think, the most useful Excel shortcut. There are a bunch of others, and we will send around some resources on other shortcuts after the live session as well. Okay, we're continuing to go, by the way, in the order of upvoting. So if you are thinking about questions, do have a read through what's in there and upvote the ones you're most interested in hearing answered, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So we've got a question here from Sam, who asks, how do the filters on pivot tables work? Good question. Let's go to our pivot. I'm going to relabel this to pivot table so that it's a bit more clear. So there are actually a few different ways that you could filter what's included in a pivot table. So number one, at the top of my row labels here, you can see I have a drop-down box that I can click. That will then let me either directly through ticking and unticking, or slightly more indirectly by using a label filter to specify some kind of a rule, decide which items are included. So that's one thing I could do. So I can decide, you know, actually I don't want to see the bad debt write-off item, something like that. Or secondly, I also have this option of using the value filters here. So this will filter what's appearing in the values column. Now, the reason why there isn't a drop down I can do here is because when you've got one of these two-dimensional ones, you have data in lots of columns. So if I've got something like this, my column labels are going to be filtering just on those dates. My row labels filter on those labels, but I could use either one to apply a value filter. So if, for example, I want to hide zero balances, you know, like here, director's loan account has zero value, I could go to row labels, value filters, does not equal, and I could specify that I want to show items where the sum of net does not equal zero. And now you can see those zero labels are gone. And there's also a third option, which is this filters box. And what this does is that this decides which items are actually included in the pivot table at all. So when we're doing the computation, do we want to exclude? So if, for example, I drag account code there, it adds a top level filter at the top. So I can say, actually, when I'm building the pivot table, I only want to see things with account code 21, for example, although that's just going to be one particular item. So that is a kind of global filter that applies over the top. And importantly, if I put my net column in here and hid the zeros, that would only exclude things where line items were a line item of zero, whereas by filtering in this way with the value filter, I'm filtering out the ones where the result of the calculation is zero. So you might have a plus 1,000, minus 1,000, but they are still hidden because the net result is zero. So that's a little bit about filters and pivot tables. So let's mark that one done. So we have another one here from Samantha. What is the keyboard shortcut using to lock the formula with dollar signs? Excellent question. So let's go to one of the ones where I was producing these kinds of references. So when you are creating a reference, you can do it either by using your keyboard to select the area, or like I just did, using your mouse, or obviously just typing the letters and numbers and colon required. You can manually type the dollar signs in, or if you press F4, which on a lot of laptop keyboards, you actually need to do function F4 to get that to work, you will automatically insert all the dollar signs for you. You can actually then press it again if you only want to have the dollars on the rows, so fixing the rows but letting the columns be flexible. F4 again if you want it the other way around, F4 again to remove them. So it's F4. Interesting, well, I don't know about interesting, but useful way to help remember that is that the dollar sign, the thing you're trying to type, is on the 4 key, and so the shortcut is on the F4 key. That's how I remember it anyway. So that's that question. Let's mark that done. We've got another question here from another anonymous attendee. How would you merge two Excel sheets that track workloads, time, dates, emails, etc., and you want formulas to run off for management information? So this is a pretty big question about trying to merge multiple different sheets together. And there are a few different ways about doing this, depending on what you're looking at. One type of merging is where you have new data that is supposed to replace the old data. So maybe, you know, it's a list of phone numbers and you've got like an archival list and you've just been given a new list and you need to update where you've got updates. And there's sort of, I'll show you how I would do that. And then the second more complicated situation is where you need to merge them, you need to amalgamate from several sources together into one. So I will talk about how that works. So let's talk about that. So first things first, if I'm dealing with something like phone numbers or other standing data, so I might have, let's quickly make some names up, A, B, C, D, E. Oh, actually, let's have Adam, Eve, and Gerald, and I've got their phone numbers 123, 124, 187. That's my standing data, and then I receive some new information that says, oh, here's my new information, my new numbers, and I need to update my list. So the way that I would do that is that I would take my old list, I would move it underneath my new list, copy and paste or cut and paste or just drag it over, I would then use, let me just move my label around, data remove duplicates, which is this option here. And I want to remove the duplicates from within column F. So I'm going to untick G. And what that will do is it will keep the first instance only of everything in column F, and it will remove the redundant ones. And this is why the ordering is important. So I want to put the more recent information on the top and the older information on the bottom. Press OK. The duplicate Adam entry has now been removed, and I now have a combined database with everything up to date. The other sort of merging is where you've maybe got values for sort of partial information in multiple places, and you need to bring that all together into one. That's usually either a matter of copying and pasting it all into one big sheet and then using something like a pivot table, or if it's something a little bit more industrial, you might need to use some of the more in-depth data manipulation tools that you'll find under the Get and Transform Data heading. So this allows you to access what's called Power Query, which is very good at doing things like merging data sets. So you can load your data sets into Excel's data model and then connect them together. It's quite an involved process, so I'm not going to go into it in the time that we have, but we do have several webinars and blogs going into further detail on the Excel community, which you can find out more about there. Another question here. Did you say that the community was free for students? I can't access it without paying. It is free for students. The background mechanics of how that works are that you need to sign up for Faculties Online. So Faculties Online is the combined offering of all of ICAEW's faculties plus the Excel community. And that is free to ACA and CFAP students. And you can use that to gain access to the Excel community. So there is a link which will circulate after the recording that you can use to get access to all of that stuff. Someone else noting summary keyboard shortcuts would be very useful. I will find the blog in question and I'll send around the link to all of the keyboard shortcuts because they're, I think, much easier to digest in list format than trying to, you can't even see my keyboard, of course. So I will make sure that that is all done. So let's mark that as answered. Okay, another question. How would we change the quarter groupings on pivot tables to match the year end that we're working with? So for example, if the year end is March. This is a good question, and it is actually really quite tricky to do that. Excel has a pretty strong internal preference for doing things using the calendar date system. So if you've got non-sequential, you want it to have it. Now, the first thing is if you've actually got the year included in those dates, it will automatically do it. If you do quarter and year, it will put them in chronological order. If you've got multiple years of data included in your data set and you need to separate them out according to that, what I would probably do is make a lookup table of what the month end, the year end dates was, and then on a row by row basis, look up what the appropriate year number was according to the transaction date. And then that would mean I'd use that to help summarize things. So it's a little bit more of an in-depth one that. So again, with the time we have, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate everything, but that's the kind of approach that I would use. Let's have a look at another question. So I'm going to try and get through as many questions as we can. We've only got a few minutes left, but I'll run almost up to the end and then we'll see what we can get through. Another question, what are the common errors when using pivot tables? For example, I was using a simple pivot to match account name and the sum of values, but the total did not agree to the total per the trial balance. I couldn't figure out how to check it after checking all the blank cells were blank. So there are a few different ways of sort of common issues here. One issue that you might notice is when I had these in just random general number formats, my total at the bottom doesn't look like 0. It looks like some weird nonsense. This is scientific notation. So this E minus 0.9 means exponent minus 0.9. In other words, this is negative 0.0000003. So what's happening here is that there is a teeny tiny rounding error. And specifically, this is what's called a floating point error, which is a rounding error that happens because we are dealing with decimal numbers and Excel is dealing with binary numbers. And sometimes when it's doing lots of that, it makes these little tiny rounding errors. And that's what has happened there. So this doesn't look like 0, it is 0. The other kind of issue that can happen that most commonly causes this is where you have numbers that are not formatted like numbers. They're formatted as text, and that was actually the difficulty I was having when I was creating my net column earlier, was that I had some text values that were happening. So if I type in a text value 1600 like this, you can see that I get a little label warning me, hey, that looks like a number, but you stored it as a text value. Even if I've got a couple of these, if I try and sum them, I'm going to get 0. And the same thing will happen in pivot tables. These are not treated like numbers. You need to convert them to number, and there is actually an automatic option here. You can click on that says number stored as text, convert that to number, and if you do that, it will work. The other way you can do it is if you type a number 1, copy the number 1, select the data that you think has this problem, and do a paste special. You can multiply, and that will then multiply those numbers by 1, and that will also change them to number format. So those are the most common causes I can think of for that specific issue. The other, just in terms of other common errors for pivot tables, the biggest ones are either not selecting all of your data with your pivot table, so when you're inserting it, leaving some rows out by accident, or not refreshing it so that it's not representing the most recent data. Right, let's take at least one more question before we wrap up. Is there a way to create a cell format and have it permanently available in all future workbooks? At present, I have to create the format in each new workbook. Now, this person has not specified what cell format is they're creating, but I'm going to bet that it's putting brackets around negative numbers because accountants love doing that for some reason. I don't know why we do it, but it's a thing that people like doing. Yes, you can do that. The way that you do it is by modifying one of the default cell styles in the workbook that defines your set of your template workbook, which is an invisible workbook in Excel that determines what all of your cell formats and things look like. You can, it is quite an involved process. So once again, I do have a blog about that, so I will dig that out and I will include that when we send around the recording. I think that's about all the questions that we have time for. So I am going to just move up quickly to talk about things closing up. The recording and workbook from today's webinar will be available. You can see the short URL there that you will be able to go to get access to that. And actually, as well as that, as I mentioned, I will also dig out a few of the specific things that people asked about so that people can take a look at those in more detail. If you want to get further into learning about Excel, as I mentioned, there is a specific guidance on the functions that are included in the syllabus, as well as how to sign up for the Excel community so that you can improve your Excel knowledge, not just for the exams, but for your career. And you can get more access, more information about that as well. Otherwise, it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your time and for coming along today. Hope you enjoyed this and found it helpful. And there will always be more spreadsheet guidance available from ICAEW and from the Excel community if you need it. So thank you very much, everybody, once again, and hope you have a very good day.